if there is a strategy, and we should not bet on it because this is more tactical than strategic. There's not a long-term version of that. And in terms of Trump, is follow the money. It's basically convert Europe to the state they already are, vassals, but totally under control vassals, where everything that they do, they have to ask permission to the US, which is already the case in most aspects. Pay up a lot, and all the profits go back to the US and to the industrial military complex in the US. No agency, no sovereignty. Considering that the Americans are extremely influential, and I'm being very diplomatic, at the European Commission, the fact that they run the European Commission makes it even easier for them to do whatever they want. And if they don't, or ignoring completely the toxic Medusa von der Leyen, which is very easy for them. This is what they are doing already. And on Ukraine, and that will be a major test because it depends on if there is a strategic vision of Trump 2.0 on what kind of NATO they want. Obviously, they want NATO completely ruled by the West, which is already the case, but for what? In the case of, for instance, if we have, I'll give an example. These Baltic chihuahuas now are yapping that they're going to turn the Baltic Sea into a NATO lake. We all know that Russia is going to look at them and say, okay, bring it on. So this is a factor of destabilization, a very, very strong factor of destabilization. And this blah, blah, blah about peacekeeping forces. Russia will never accept foreign peacekeeping forces right on their western borders, which in this case will be the western borders of Novorossiya. Forget it. So the tension will continue to be there. And who's going to lead this new NATO? Maybe not France and Germany. The original American plan under the previous administration was London, Warsaw, Baltic Chihuahuas, and Kiev. This is already collapsing. So we don't know if they have a plan B. And all the internal NATO documents, which basically talk about NATO rearming and expanding towards a war against Russia, which will be more or less inevitable around 2030. This is NATO think tank, blah, 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 because they know they don't have the forces, the weapons, the strategic reach, and the military competence to even start a war like this. And they will be turned into steak tartare in 1 week, if not less, you know. And we're not even talking about the Russian hypersonics attacking all the major decision centers of NATO, if we get to this point. So this is something far ahead for Trump 2.0. For the moment is complete subservience of their sphere of influence. And then Trump 2.0 is betting on two spheres of influence. Already conquered Europe, very, very easy to manage, and not fully conquered the Western Hemisphere, the Americas, Latin America, essentially. So, and that will explain why Brazil, as a BRICS member, will be in a very tough spot from now on. They already are from now on. And Argentina is in the back for the Americans, but that's not enough. The key is where Brazil leans. So this is going to be the two areas of foreign policy where it's guaranteed for Trump 2.0 to maintain the illusion of an empire. It's the West, essentially. It's NATO's done plus the Western Hemisphere. And with these add-ons that are already part of the show, of the circus, Canada, Greenland, Panama Canal, and all that, expanding the resource base of the empire and controlling key channels of communication. And the key is really the Arctic. because once again, there's nobody in Trump 2.0 who even understands the depths, the reach, and the planning involved in the Russian Northern Sea route in the Arctic, what the Chinese call the Arctic Silk Road. It's the same thing. It's a Russian project with deep Chinese input. And there are already Chinese cargo vessels plying the Northern Sea route since, if I'm not mistaken, October last year. And soon, with this outstanding fleet of icebreakers that Russia has, unequaled, is going to be 12 months a year. So this is a threat to the Suez Canal in terms of a brand new maritime corridor, as important as the North-South, which is three BRICS, once again, Russia, Iran, and China. So Trump 2.0 look at the chessboard and say, well, at least if we can control the Northwest Passage and we have Canada as our lackey and we get Greenland, then we can put up some competition. Competition, yes, but if you are, for instance, and this is extraordinary, Southeast Asia, and you want to have your products reaching Europe the fastest way possible, you're going to use the Northern Sea route. Simple as that. It's faster, cheaper. It's going to be the wave of the future. Malaysia has already said we are partners, and it's not by accident that in the last Vladivostok forum, the guest of honor was the Prime Minister of Malaysia, Anwar Ibrahim. So this is all being planned carefully between Russia and its Asian allies, which are many all over the place. And out of the blue, the Americans coming up with this competition via the Northwest Passage is not going to change much, you know? And fascinating to watch how the impression that we have is that Trump looks at, or somebody tells him about these new acronyms of, and he doesn't know exactly what it is, but he sees them all as a threat. So he has to say something against them, like BRICS is dead. You know, right. Not based in fact, not based in evidence whatsoever, but he needs something bombastic to say about it. But he doesn't understand it because exactly his team is not explaining to him the geopolitical and geoeconomic relevance of all these mechanisms, new corridors of communication. You go to any forum here in Russia or any debate, high-level debate, always the main geoeconomic theme is new corridors of connectivity. All of them, all of them. Correct me if I'm wrong. Is anybody in the US think tank land discussing corridors of connectivity? Maybe one paper.
No. I mean, they're not discussing anything of worth when it comes to infrastructure development at all.
There you go.
Trump says a lot of threats to BRICS. A lot of people are very impressed with the way Trump is talking, how it's treating Europe, just in terms of the sake of for realism and a realistic understanding of what's actually going on. I think these comments actually matter. First, he thinks Spain is part of BRICS. Then he says this about China.
BRICS, the BRICS nations, I think that's breaking up very rapidly. We said that if they're going to go in and do anything to undermine the dollar, that includes China. I don't even know that they're a member of BRICS. I had a few nations get together to try and play cute.
Wow.
Trump doesn't know that China is a part of BRICS.
Wow.
The C in BRICS is probably, if not the first, as you said, Pepe, Russia, given its role, has been so instrumental in the development of BRICS, especially since the sanctions. He doesn't know.
Man, I'm going to apply for a job, Danny. Can you get me a recommendation? You know, if I had 5 minutes a day to explain BRICS to Trump, wow.
A lot of people are impressed with the way Trump is talking to Europe. I think the Trump administration, Vance, and them, I think they're actually not doing the world a service by putting everything on Europe, given that the United States bears the primary responsibility for the Ukraine conflict and also the destruction of Europe as we know it. I don't feel bad for Europe, though, because as Western vassal states, they have willingly went along with it. The Ukraine conflict is the actual thing that's dead for the United States. And all this bluster about BRICS, I don't see any way of the Trump administration that can stop BRICS. So what do you make of this moment overall that the Trump administration is navigating?
It's a non-stop reality show, in fact. Lots of bluster, lots of theoretical plot twists, very carnivalesque atmosphere, right? But substance is another matter. And of course, if we had thoughtful observations by Trump or some of his team about where the global south, the global majority in the new system of international relations is going, they will be terrified, in fact. And in fact, some members of the US ruling class, the ones pulling the strings behind, the follow the money crowd, they are terrified. There's not much left for them, apart, once again, the vassals in Europe and the Western Hemisphere. That's it. So, in fact, even without the new Yalta, we are seeing spheres of influence being delineated right in front of us. And the title of my latest book last year was NATO Stun against Eurasia against NATO Stun. Okay, a fine-tuning of that will be Eurasia in all its declinations against the Western NATO Stun Western Hemisphere, but not against. In terms of a division of spheres of influence, de facto, already happening. You know, how belligerent NATO will continue to be, it will depend a lot on how Trump wants it to be belligerent. So now it's only it's in his hands. Obviously, he's not gonna support a NATO that the way NATO was working until 3 months ago, a month ago. It's counterproductive for his aims, even if the Europeans pay it. But what's in it for the US? Unless they keep buying inordinate amounts of American weaponry, fine, perfect. But to do what with that? Are they going to start a war in China against China in Taiwan? No, NATO cannot do that. Are they going to start several different wars in Africa where they're going to have their asses kicked? No, it's not going to happen. So there's not much left, And of course, those NATO, those nations in Eastern Europe want to have a more relevant place in NATO. The Baltic Chihuahuas, Poland, Romania. These are two-bit actors. Nobody takes them seriously. Starting with the Russians and everybody else, and even people inside NATO. So it's interesting that Trump hasn't said anything about Turkey so far. I'm very curious.
Nothing. You're right. Absolutely nothing.
Curious about.
Nothing about Turkey. Very little. I mean, Rubio was just in Israel doing the whole "we are with you on Iran, no matter what," all of this. But for the most part, yes, you're right. There's so many developments happening in that region, including
and
what Turkey's up to.
And Erdogan and Turkey, they are just waiting to see where Trump stands exactly on the role of Turkey inside NATO. Right. Because if there is no role for Turkey inside NATO, Turkey will have its cue. Bye-bye. We don't want it anymore. It's a possibility, of course. They're all NATO Atlanticists in Istanbul and all that,
Yeah, of course.
But then they look to their east, where everything is there, all the business opportunities, all the geopolitical connections. What the hell are we doing with these European vassals? Nothing. So it will be we can see maybe the first sparks here and there of the internal collapse of NATO, which could take several years, of course. Just like we see the first sparks of the internal collapse of the EU. Many of us tended to think that the collapse would be in parallel. And I think that still applies. I think both will collapse embracing together towards the abyss. It might take a few months, or it might take until the end of the decade, but it's inevitable. First of all, because there is no reason, no practical reason for both to exist. In terms of the EU, European citizens, the average European citizen, voter, taxpayer, will have to come to his or her conclusion by themselves. And they are starting already, which is a good point. In terms of NATO, there's only one actor who decides, Washington. And if Washington says, no, we don't need this shit anymore, that's it. It will collapse. It's inevitable. And there's already, Munich was fascinating because they were the first explicit warnings that, okay, maybe this will go on, but it has to be completely different, and that's it. And we rule and you obey. Well, we are already watching a reorganization of the chessboard. It's absolutely fascinating.
It's almost like a grand paradox in a lot of ways, because U.S. foreign policy really can't function without its allies, aka vassals. To say that Europe is going to be responsible for Europe, which really means a huge, I mean, it's a large, we're talking about a large sphere of influence, because Europe and Eurasia, really hard to distinguish. Eurasia, Eastern Europe is basically Eurasia. It's not Western Europe. It doesn't see itself as this kind of poodle. That's leaving a whole lot of responsibility to Europe, while at the same time demanding that they get 5% NATO spending. There's this grand paradox of, okay, well, we're not going to rely on quote unquote allies, but we're going to force them to be on their own, but more dependent on us. There's somewhat of more of a rebranding here, maybe, than a realignment in foreign policy.
Rebranding. Absolutely. It's rebranding. We're going to have a few... I would say, staring at our faces, how far this rebranding goes, and if it's for real or not for show. And that will be the role of the so-called peacekeeping forces, right, assuming there is a deal on Ukraine.
Yeah.
Before that, we don't know anything. It can be just a show. But depending on what the Americans propose and the Russians say, do you actually believe that we're going to have
sounds like a buffer zone with NATO troops? That's
where the hell do you live? Yeah. So Trump may propose something different, like a demilitarized zone or whatever. And of course, the possibility that Western Ukraine could also be dismembered, and the Americans won't say anything about that. And then we're going to have the European vassals fighting each other. I'm going to get this part. I'm going to get Galicia. I'm going to get Transcarpathia. You know, it's going to be hell. Exactly. So I think it's still too early, but the possibilities of decomposition are enormous. And of course, what the Americans will offer the Russians to, assuming, which you still don't know, they really want to end the war with a broader framework, or this is going to be a Minsk III with a ceasefire, and the whole thing will be back again in a few years. The Russians already said, forget it. We don't even need to discuss that.
Yeah.
Well, the Americans should know that, forget any variations of Minsk III that you're going to try to impose on Moscow. Right. And then, of course, is there going to be a role for NATO in what's left of Ukraine and, of course, in parts of Eastern Europe? So this is the key question. Then we'll see if NATO is going to collapse suddenly or little by little, indefinitely.
Yeah. Well, it's so interesting to hear when Hegseth was talking, a lot of people were very celebratory. And mind you, he did say some things that are reasonable, but also there was nuggets of very unreasonable things, including when he was talking about what you were referring to, Pepe, NATO, kind of like he was just saying European troops and non-European troops. So there are like these little nuggets of, well, what does this even mean? You know, European, non-European.
Oh,
Does
Miley
that mean- yeah, I'm like anyway, you're good. Like Somaliland. You know, I know Trump has a kind of a fetish for Somaliland and some of
He
these
has
like, breakaway republics.
Yes, yeah.
It's like, okay, are you gonna take troops from everywhere? Maybe, I mean, maybe they just mean like, you know, non-NATO Eastern European countries, you know, whatever. But it still goes to show that there's a lot of room, I think, that we're going to be playing with for quite a while. Actually, I don't see this resolving.
It's going to be fascinating to watch this next few months. And if there is a Yalta on May 9th here on Victory Day, well, that will be the day. So between now and Victory Day, anything could happen.